And there we go. Happy Saturday. Saturday Swarm session with a lot of lovely and extremely skilled and hardcore Catalyst people here. We have Kawi from the Catalyst School, LATAM Town Hall, LATAM community. Amazingly involved Daniel, part of WADA and Africa Town Hall. Yoram. Yoram kind of builds his own ecosystem, I would say. Everything mentorship and advice and consulting. Amazing. Aaron from Consens, also pretty long involved already in Catalyst. Met you on a pretty early day. Awesome to still see you around and see you building. Steve, legends don't need introductions. Steve is Steve, one of our community Steves. And Thorsten. Thorsten got pretty much involved, I think, in Catalyst since Fund 7, Fund 6, Fund 7, I think, something like this. Exactly. So amazing, nice minds here. And today we go through the Community Governance Oversight, CGO, white paper release, which was released, I think it was on Monday this week, Tuesday, October 5th, 6th, 4th, something around. I put a drop here in the live chat as well. And with this, I will shut up and then Thorsten, Aaron, thanks a lot for joining. Thanks a lot for presenting the topic as well. I read through the document already, and personally, a lot of respect. I think you spent a lot of time, conversations, and deep thoughts on this. And right now, the dReps are introduced the first time for Fund 10. A lot of people have a lot of hope on dReps. And therefore, I'm more glad as well to see people around who are also looking on the maybe pitfalls and dangerous side of dReps. And this is where you pretty much went into right to look on it from an objective perspective on positive as the negative side, and to introduce really critical thinking before stuff gets implemented already as community initiative. And this is awesome. And then there you go.
Thank you so much, Felix. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to share this dRep white paper with you. I will share on my screen. Can you see?
Yep.
Okay. So this white paper was, as full disclosure, funded as part of the Community Governance Oversight, and was effectively a group of 3 people who took the role as an editor, which is Kenrick, Stephen, and myself. And the lead editor to be contacted would be Kenrick in this context. And then we found 3 members of the community who effectively contributed a part to this. This is Philip Lasso from IOG. That is Stephen from Wolfram and Aaron from Consens, and they wrote a section of that. So the idea here was multifolded. On the one hand side, it was kind of like the first time we tried to experiment with the fact that we have a community-written white paper as such. And the context in this, which was picked, was delegated representatives in Cardano project Catalyst governance. So just kind of to look at it from different angles to actually help the community to understand some aspects. This is not conclusive by no means. And there are discussions, obviously, already at this moment in time to kind of deepen some work further. But it's actually the first attempt to kind of put a paper out, which is actually developed by the community and which doesn't come from IOG or anyone else. There was also good participation from the community in the review. Yes, Felix.
With this, you could even say it's the first community-funded, community-based white paper from the community.
You could say that. if you want to kind of blow your whistle, yeah, you could say that. So there was also good feedback from the community actually in the review process. There were quite a few people involved in that one, and we hope that with this white paper we kind of start some thinking and perhaps also some discussions in the community or at least some awareness, so that when certain things might or might not happen, we at least have a starting point also for discussions. So it's quite interesting, because obviously we are running now into Fund 10 with the dReps, and we will see when it kind of happened, whether things kind of like play out or don't play out in certain ways. This is not a critique on the dRep system in itself. It's just kind of going through different aspects of it. So let me quickly run you effectively through the introduction and then through the 3 chapters. So as you know, Cardano or Project Catalyst is funded by Cardano Treasury, and is actually kind of giving out quite a substantial amount of money to different proposals which can be raised by the community. It is also kind of like a part of the Voltaire phase to figure out how decentralized governance in itself could work. And in this context, IOG is now introducing delegated representation. We all probably have been involved in the one or the other discussion on that topic. And the principle which is used in this context is so-called liquid democracy, which can be seen here in this figure. I think most of the people in this call are aware. It's actually delegating your voting power to representatives, and the representatives in itself then have the ability to vote. So the first part of this paper, which was written by Philip Lazo, who is a research fellow from IOG, is about the role of delegated representation in blockchain governance. So this principle of liquid democracy is not a totally new one, but it's on the other side also not a very well established one yet. And there are some research papers out there, and what he did was actually a paper review, and that's the part of the first chapter. Then the second part is going a little bit more into the voting in itself, and that was written by Stephen McCurdy from Wolfram Research, and that is looking at the voting power with a mechanism which is called a Banzhaf index, which is a kind of a mechanism to measure voting power. So the number of votes doesn't equal necessarily the power you have with your vote. You don't necessarily always need the maximum number of votes to have an influence and at the end of the day decide votes in a specific way, and we can go through that one. And then the third part, and thanks Aaron that you're here, is about how you form consensus in governance documentation. And that might be quite an interesting one, because at the end of the day, even if you're putting something in written words down, how is that done today, and how could that be done in a different way using actually different voting mechanisms? And he also is introducing a model where voting can be done with different mechanisms, and he puts this out effectively for discussion. So without no further ado, I'll probably quickly run through this. So so this first chapter by Philip Lazo is about liquid democracy, and he looked at a number of different papers in form of literature review. And what he found is that it's kind of confusing. So the papers in itself don't have all the same statement. So there are papers which are in favor of, and there are papers which are against liquid democracy, and obviously that has to be considered. So what does liquid democracy bring to the table? but on this other side also, what are perhaps the risk or why people are saying it is not the right thing to do. And as always, then what he found in his research is, first of all, there is not that much literature out there yet, due to the fact that the system in itself hasn't also been not widely adopted, but there are some areas where it has been adopted. And then secondly, kind of like, what does that now mean for us, and how can we kind of take something from that one? So there were then 3 questions. So why are voters abstinent? So why don't they even vote? Then the second one was the quality of the outcome. So the intent in this case is, how can you achieve that the outcome out of a voting system is the best possible one? And I think we all kind of can see that, at least with the last funding rounds, we in some cases might have an opinion that the outcome was not the best one. So does in this case liquid democracy help to improve that? Then the question of how delegates can be selected, what mechanisms are there? And there are obviously elements in that context. And I'm not going into too much detail here. He went effectively through a number of documents. One says there is a positive gain, and there are cases where liquid democracy did significantly improve the quality of the outcome. That's quite an interesting one, because it seems to be one question which is at the moment as an elephant in the room. Why do we have outcomes as we have? And would that be better by having effectively a mechanism of liquid democracy? And I think these are also the points which are presented when IOG was introducing dReps. It will kind of increase the number of people represented and voting, and so the number of votes that will in itself then drive the better outcomes. And the second one is, liquid democracy never seriously harms the chance of a good outcome which is selected. So kind of the system in itself is in favor of good outcomes. At least that's kind of the result of this first paper. I would highly recommend that you go through that, also from the effects. Yeah, so are we getting better outcomes? That's actually the question which is mainly discussed here in this context, and there are some indications that actually might be the case. So then the second one from Steve, and I'm biased here from my perspective. That's one which probably is attracting a lot of attention, is about voting power. So how does this actually, the concentration of voting power in the hand of delegates, how does that influence actually the outcome? And that one is actually working, as I already mentioned, with the attempt to measure voting power, not the number of votes, but voting power. And I think the easiest in this context is, and I invite you to read the paper yourself, but it is measured by an Banzhaf power index. And what that actually does is it tries to express how much influence actually an individual voter has compared to others. That effectively has 2 factors. On the one hand, the quota threshold for approval, and the second one is the weight of each possible coalition within the system. And that is introducing an interesting element, which we can also see in other voting systems, which is that the concentration of voting of votes is increasing actually the voting power significantly. So building coalitions itself is increasing the chance of success. And the question which kind of comes in this context, what does that actually mean? So do you need realistically 100 for 50% of all votes, or can you already influence the outcome before that? And there is one interesting example in here, which is derived from the Genesis keys in the Cardano ecosystem. And that is kind of based on the fact that there were 7 Genesis keys which were established. And they are distributed in a way of 3 to IOG, 2 to the Cardano Foundation, and 2 to Emergo. So you need to vote of 5 to actually get a change approved. So the question now is, what does that mean in real terms? And in real terms, when you kind of look at it very carefully, it means that any combination of votes in itself can be expressed then in the question of success or not. And you see then that the combination of voters in itself is not equally distributed. So there is a higher power given in this context to IOG than to Cardano Foundation or even Emergo, because if Cardano Foundation and Emergo would build a coalition, they would still not have the power to have the casting vote. So it always needs actually IOG to pass. So if IOG votes against it, then, or for it, and finds just one of the 2 as a partner for it, then effectively the vote will be successful, which is leading to the fact that at the end, the ultimate higher power, according to the power index, would lie with IOG compared to Cardano Foundation and Emergo. So what does that mean in real terms? Well, in real terms, it actually means that at a certain moment in time, you're getting to a point where one party is actually having the ultimate power in their hand, who is the deciding vote. And you can do this analysis. I would invite you to look at this figure here of this specific case for Cardano Genesis key, because that's quite easy to understand. There is just a limited number of combinations due to the fact that there are 3 parties involved, but it has an impact. So what Wolfram then also did, they did an analysis based on the voting results for Fund 5, because that was the one where they had data for, and they did an analysis, and it was effectively trying to figure out how the distribution of wallets was effectively, and what they did is they distributed the wallets into buckets of 10% each and said how much weight do they have as such. So this is a distribution in itself. And when you look at the distribution of wallets, then you will see as a result here that the top 10% of all wallets in a coalition would always have the deciding vote. The Banzhaf index is in that context talking about a dictatorship. And that also means that effectively, no matter what everyone else is voting, the voting is actually irrelevant. It's nil. So it's effectively a powerless vote. And this next figure shows if it would have been randomly assigned to different segments, then you can actually see that if we have a real distribution of voting weight and the power, it doesn't really make a difference, make an impact. So between these two figures, what you actually really can see is if you see a collision of certain wallets which have a high power index, meaning or translated at the voting mechanism which we are having here right now, which have a lot of ADA, they actually get into the position of deciding vote. And I think to a certain extent, this is what we also can see and feel out of the vote which we saw now with Fund 9. There were for sure some big wallets which actually decided the outcome of the vote. And in that context, you also have to discuss or see what would happen if you have a concentration scenario or a random distribution, and what are the elements which could lead to a concentration scenario. In the context of the dReps, it is known which people will vote. It will be most likely be known what they are voting for. And due to the fact that they're known, there is a likeliness, or it could be a likeliness that coalitions are going to be built. Yeah, and that actually would mean, in theory, if you don't know, it's abstracted down now to the vote of the dReps in itself, it really then depends of how much is that vote representing the whole voting system. If just dReps would vote, 10% in a coalition would probably already have an deciding factor in the outcome of the vote. So effectively would determine for every single decision which they make that is the winning decision. And we'll see effectively with Fund 10 whether we see this tendency happening. So, and the third one is the one which is forming consensus in the governance documentation. And in that context, I have it now a little bit easier because now I can ask Aaron to quickly kind of give a summary of his section.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that this section is trying to give some practical implementation, at least a proposal for practical implementation of some of the ideas of liquid democracy and on the dRep using. It's divided into two parts. The first part is specifically around the need for documentation for the best practice of the dRep system on the Catalyst on Project Catalyst. Documents like code of conduct, like guidelines that are already kind of documents that are already being built by the community in other aspect of Project Catalyst will be needed for the dRep as well. And here we propose a way to create format a consensus around building those documents, not just for approving a whole document, by a process of creating the document in a decentralized manner by the community and discussing the details. We will hopefully over the next few weeks, hopefully during Fund 10, during I hope that the assessment phase of Fund 10, we will launch the MVP version of the consensus platform that will allow this process to be implemented. We can create those documents in a decentralized manner by the community. The second part of our section is some kind of a suggestion of how we can use different voting mechanism or decision-making methods according for the different voting power calculation. So we can take the advantage of each one of those systems and put it in the right context, because each one of those systems has its own pros and cons. democratic system or direct democracy of one person, one vote has its pros and cons. The plutocratic systems that being used right now in Catalyst and in other DAO that calculate voting power by the amount of coin of voting or tokens that the voters hold has its own pros and cons as you know that the voting will be in the benefit of the project because of the stake of the voter, but on the other hand, it brings too much power to the whales, as been demonstrated in the previous section of the bands of index by the bands of index. And there is another voting mechanism that can be used, like a meritocratic, that will require also a digital identity, and also quadratic voting, etc. And here we suggest how we can create a diversity of voting systems and implement them on different processes or different documents according to the need. So this is, of course, just a proposal. It's a base ground for further discussion. But the idea is that we divide those documents for 3 levels: high, mid, and low. And the highest level is the most, let's say, the less practical and more from the like say vision document or the constitution. And we suggest that in those kind of document, more democratic system is the right one. And as we go down to the low level, that is more practical and need more some more knowledge or experience, then other system will be more suitable for those kind of documents. So this is our section for this review for the white paper.
Are there any comments or questions? Steve?
No, I get you. I'm following you.
Okay. Any comments or questions from the group?
To this point specifically or general?
In general, actually, about any point, any comments, any remarks, any questions, we're open to pretty much any kind of feedback.
So when you were talking about the dReps and how that could also be controlled by whales, right? I mean, that is based on some assumptions, right? You know, like.
No, it's not necessarily saying it's controlled by whales. What we're trying to say is that the power a vote has in itself is not just measured by the absolute number of votes you have, but there effectively there is an exponential increase of the power. Exponential is now probably the wrong word, but there is an increase of the power. And the building of coalitions in itself will increase the chance to influence the outcome of the vote. Yeah. So the point there is you don't need the absolute number of votes to still be the casting vote and have the ultimate decision-making power.
Right.
Yeah, and the question which kind of like to be answered now is what are the mechanisms? And my understanding from the workshops, and I'm not a dRep, but from the videos which I saw is there is a control in the maximum voting power per dRep, but there is no control in place which prevents the building of a coalition of people voting in the same way.
A saturation cap, like in the SBO.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
yeah.
I've attended all the dRep workshops and spent a lot of time considering, you know, being in the first cohort of dReps, and I am not going to do that. I'm more. I kind of feel like this winter and Fund 10 and Circle version 4 are pivotal in shaping what comes after them. right? You know, because I think that the community is demanding significant change and is going to get it. You know, I think everybody's ready for it, including input output. For me, the question has always been the people with a lot of voting power.
Mhm.
They've been very modest, you know, in my opinion, right? You know, you can just tell by average size of the wallets, you know, it's not bringing them out. I think for the really large ones, it's not significant the amount of money that's been dealt with in Catalyst. There has been nothing allowed to be voted on that would change the direction of Cardano significantly, if at all. And it's the question in my mind, Thorsten, you know, the voters that have registered and never voted, which is like 90% of the registered vote. You know, will they delegate? You know, will they actually at least take that step finally to be represented in the vote?
Well, we will see. I mean, that is the one reason why dReps are introduced. At least that's kind of what I heard from IOG as one of the reasons to increase the voting base. And if that happens, that's for sure good, because actually that alleviates a little bit big wallets against smaller wallets. Yeah, because yeah, so that is good. But I personally see kind of the danger that the building of a coalition becomes actually easier now. Yeah, because dReps will know each other. And
absolutely,
from an and we can see that within Catalyst, there are different groups of people. We have shared interest, and with a shared interest, there is then obviously kind of also the ability to try to build these coalitions. Yeah, so kind of the limitation of 1% of the overall vote for a single dRep is in that context not really. It is a limitation for the individual, and the person has still to put the work in. But I mean, it's pretty much like in any other voting system, that if you have effectively a vote which is not an individual one, but which follows the principle of a party, then that determines at the end of the day kind of your success rate in the voting or not. So the,
I mean,
yeah, so the question which kind of comes out, I mean, I have a number of thoughts around it personally. One of them is, yeah, will we see the building of coalitions of dReps which are voting in the same intent or with the same for the same proposals? Because it's a natural behavior, kind of, if I have the same intent, then I probably kind of try to form a group of people, and that's a coalition. And if I have then the voting power delegated to me and it's sufficient, then I might have a casting vote in that context, which eliminates then actually the vote of individuals in itself. Yeah, makes it almost irrelevant. That's kind of like a bit of a danger, because that's actually not a decentralization element. It's actually a centralization element. That's kind of centralizing the outcome of votes in the hands of a few. I understand that IOG says we will have to delegate in every single funding round, and that might have an effect in that, but it's always a retrospective. Yeah, I saw 2 hands raised, but I don't know who it was. Ah, there we go. Okay, Felix.
One question to this whole delegation stuff. This, what we see here with the delegators, is a little bit also quite natural to Cardano with the stake pools and all the stuff, right? And here we are always running the assumption that, okay, we saw it in Fund 9, things can be used for good as for bad, right? Let's say, for example, you have a dRep. This dRep, okay, a dRep cannot have more than 1% of the maximum voting power delegated to his account. If he has more, it will decrease his vote and decision-making power, right? He will not be able to vote, actually. Like with a stake pool, let's say, for example, if he's for more than, I think, fully saturated pool is 64 million ADA. When he has more, he loses performance. Well, right now we don't have too much people with too much luxus around, but what happens, and we know that the world is aggressive and brutal, what happens when we have player coming in, let's say, if they delegate their votes, they don't lose anything. If they delegate the ADA to a pool, they don't lose anything. Even if the pool doesn't creates any rewards, even if the delegator is not even to vote. What happens? Let's say I would have 500 million ADA, and I don't like the dRep. And I just wait, and maybe, let's say, okay, the dRep gets delegated votes on 0.5, 0.6, something like this. And I just fucking delegate 400 million ADA to him and make sure that he has more than 1% and is not able to vote. I can mute the people, I can kick them out. The same with a stake pool. I can go to a stake pool when I say, I don't like Jimbo Labs. I delegate fucking 500 million ADA to their pool. The pool will not mint any blocks anymore. And I don't lose anything as attacker, right? It doesn't take off the value from my ADAs. It just blocks the people. What happens actually with our mechanisms when we have, let's say, really strong capital people with very aggressive mindsets who just figure out, wait, your whole system is built on very naive, positive, best case thinking.
I mean, the mechanism on that side, I get it. I think the bigger danger in that context is actually you can vote, the downvoting capability in itself is leading to the fact that you eliminate effectively the vote, which actually happened in this funding round already. So kind of like the amount of downvoting happening in itself was significant, and due to the fact that you have a 15% difference between the up and the down votes, it actually elevates the downvote over the upvote. Of course, you just need 86% down to downvote 100% upvote. So I think they will not delegate. That might happen. I think what could happen is that the delegate block the pool and just short before the snapshot change their mind and take the money away. And yes, you have voting power, but effectively kind of people would have delegated to you and saw that you oversaturated. More or less might have changed their mind. That diffuses effectively the voting again. And from my perspective, it becomes easier to determine how much voting power you actually need to eliminate a vote which you're not agree with, which is when the vote is effectively represented by a dRep. Because of the transparency which has to be up there before. How do you kind of collect votes for you as a dRep? You have to campaign for what you're going to do, and that more or less kind of makes your voting predictable. And there are questions, obviously, still, how transparent do you have to be? Steve?
Yeah, I mean, based on the registered ADA, right? I think in Fund 8 it was like 3.5 billion, which means a 1% cap for a dRep is 34 million. And on that level, the serious whales, of whom there are not many, are completely diluting the power of their vote. Unless they're, like how many dReps, and even if you delegate to a dRep, that doesn't mean that changes their perspective, right? So that means that there have to be dReps that share the whale's perspective.
Or you could play the system actually and delegate to a dRep to block the vote, make people nervous, kind of to move the vote somewhere else, and just before the snapshot, take your voting power away and vote as an individual wallet again. So let's say you're effectively eliminating the dRep in his voting power by having an ability to manipulate effectively the amount of voting power this individual dRep would have. So the point is, the difference now is, before you didn't know what the single little tiny wallets would be voting for. Now you do. And that's the advantage for someone who has deep wallets. Now you know against which concrete actor you have to vote.
Well, and it, you know, on the other side, you know, like the small wallets, you know, this is their chance, right? This is the only way that they can have an equal voice with those whales. You know, and that's kind of a question to me. You know, it's like, is it a rush to delegate to dReps so that you have the feeling that you've got a voice? You know, but at the end of the day, they're still, you know, they have to follow up with whatever it is they say to the voters that encourages them to delegate to a given dRep. They have to follow up and they have to vote that way, or they'll lose that voting power. And that, you know, over time, how this plays out, you know, do the small wallets end up, you know, saturating all the dReps, and the whales hold on and they form their own voting coalitions just by, you know, communicating with one another? You know, I mean, like, that's, you know, it's the question, you know, it's been the question. I got involved in Catalyst to see what happens, right? I want to be involved in it to see, can it maintain not being corrupted by the wealthy, you know? And I don't know, you know. What it seems to me to indicate is it really needs everybody to engage and understand what's going on, and we don't have those habits culturally, as far as I can tell. You know, because we're seeing the same things. People are not voting, even if they're registered. They're not voting.
And you see that, and you see that as a generic trend. Yeah, I mean, if you take it away from Catalyst, if you look into the political system, more and more people kind of who are having the ability to vote don't vote because they don't feel that it has an impact and they cannot be bothered. Yeah, absolutely. So the number of votes in itself goes down. I mean, the other element, and that's probably an effect on that one, is and I think the problem is still the same. Yeah,
I do too.
1,200 proposals, doesn't matter whether one person has to read them or 100 people have to read them. The effort, the individual effort, is still the same, and the time frame in which you have to do that is quite tight. Yeah, you have to make your mind up, and the realistic. I mean, what will for sure happen is, due to the fact that dReps have to vote at least for 60 proposals, they will vote for 60 proposals. Yeah. So there will be more expression of voting in itself. But it doesn't prevent anyone else kind of to vote also 60 or 100 times. Yeah. So, I mean, that.
Well, I think, you know, I think that we've created this situation, and I say we, I mean input output, right? If you have this open-ended funding mechanism, you know, that's why we have 1,200 proposals, right? Everybody's got their own shiny object in the world they want to get funded for, and they want to do that. And they are so diverse, you know, the range of proposals, you know, it dilutes and diffuses everything. And I think if we can say, hey, we want to look at fewer proposals for larger amounts to actually advance the Cardano roadmap, that makes a lot more sense to a lot of people, right? Because then the question becomes more conceptual, you know, and that can be a real debate in the community. It's not a debate in the community whether or not DC Spark should get funding and Cardano for Climate should get funding. It's like, it's apples and oranges, you know, and so it becomes random who gets funded and who does not, you know, because everybody just picks their favorite shiny object, whether it's a technical shiny object or a social you know, shiny object or a community building object, you know, whatever the range of proposals are. But if we were to reduce the scope that we allow proposals to be submitted into, and, you know, maybe increase the amounts they can be, then we can actually get into the more deeper conversations about what is the best strategy to achieve the Cardano roadmap. Because we're distracted right now with so many different things.
Yeah, on the other side, I mean, there is an element which I also can see, which is the reduced number of funded proposals, which are all falling in a similar area, is leading to the fact that the diversity itself gets reduced. And there are two elements which kind of like are, from my perspective, crucial that the system work. The one is that you have a high level of diversity, because at the end of the day, if you don't, you're missing out big time to grow. And on the other side, you have a decentralization. So the question from my perspective is, are these two elements actually kind of reflected in the processes and the mechanisms which we are using? And just looking at this paper now, I mean, if you would delegate your voting power to a dRep, and the dRep with the proposal C is voting for doesn't get through, you do that perhaps once or twice, but the third time you might kind of look at it, and it's a natural behavior that you say, okay, so what is closest to my heart and what is actually successful, and you would start delegating to that. And you can see that actually also when you look at the stake pools. Yeah, so we have 3,000 stake pools, but then at the end of the day, what you also can see is there are certain stake pools which are successful and others which are not successful. And the ones which are successful, you can see that there are often multi-stake pools. Yeah. So and if you kind of look at that and assume that the mechanisms in dReps would work in a similar way, the consequence for me out of that one is, how is that system now kind of supporting an effect which is actually, at least from my perspective, undesired? Yeah. At the end of the day, it could end up that you have effectively a handful of groups and you pick one. And yes, okay, all of these groups might have certain projects coming through, but it eliminates totally the ability for someone to get through who cannot be part of this coalition. Yeah. Felix.
One more, because we are coming to the time as well.
Okay.
It's already 1 hour. One general question to the white paper and the initiative here. Let's say there would be a follow-up on this, because I think this is pretty awesome work, and we definitely should figure out how we can have some processes which are able to regularly create such white papers. But I think what you're piloting here is somehow a similar process to the CIP, just on a very other section, to say, okay, community is able to actually provide high quality content on specific topics with a serious analytic and research behind, to move the ecosystem in a certain direction and to facilitate and steward guides, participate in this process. What was your main challenge when creating this white paper? And if there would be a follow-up, what would you need to have it more effectively and more comfortable for you?
I think the process in itself, it was surprisingly smooth. At least that's my reflection on it. We started initially with 5 authored. It boiled down to 3, so 2 dropped out. And the process in itself was actually not too bad. There was also good participation from the community to comment on that one. So I mean, from my perspective, it obviously it was funded. Perhaps kind of like the funding side of things would have to be reconsidered. It was in a way that all the authors in itself contributed their work effectively voluntarily. There is opportunity kind of to improve that and at the end of the day kind of compensate in a way. And I mean, at the end of the day, there are so many topics. I mean, there are discussions obviously now kind of to also propose for Fund 10, because there are some questions which kind of come out of this white paper. When you read through that stuff, you more or less kind of come up with an observation, and then you kind of see whether that makes sense to go deeper. Yeah, so there are some commitments already. So for example, Stephen from Wolfram says he definitely wants to go deeper. We're discussing now how we can look also in the technicality of some stuff, get some hands on some data, whether it's now kind of for the overall voting, or there are other votings which are happening right now, which also kind of could be used at least to verify the balance of power index, whether that is something which we should make available to the community so that they can understand how effectively voting powers in different scenarios are actually working. Yeah, but the main challenge here was availability for data. So if you could have hands-on data, I know kind of like you don't want to have an transparency on the one hand side, but on the other side, to do analysis, you need it. Yeah, so it's
Thorsten,
more availability to stuff rather than kind of people being able to do that. And yeah, I mean, it would be great if more people kind of take up the stint and said, I want to write effectively 2-3 pages for a certain topic, and it gets effectively moderated and edited by a team of people who are willing to do that. So Kenrick did an amazing job on that one, and he will go down in further topics. So this is not the end. This is just kind of one step, and we will try to kind of keep this rolling. Steve.
Yeah, I just had a question regarding the data. As you've understood what's been described so far about the Cardano API, do you think that that's going to give you the data that you and Steph McCurdy have talked about? I'm
too far away from that. The discussion which we had internally was kind of to look at some voting data, which probably will come now out of the Circle 4 voting. Of course, that seemed to be on-chain, and hopefully that's accessible. So there are discussions to get in contact with dReps to see kind of like whether we have then access to data, so and can do an analysis on that. The problem in itself is the amount of wallets which we would have to process is just horrendously big. Yeah? So you have to come up with a mechanism to slice and dice that. Yeah, so you cannot look at every single wallet. So, and that's kind of where Stephen wants to work a bit deeper. But yeah, he's very keen to do more.
I'm going to see him week after next. I'm going to attend the Wolfram conference in Illinois.
Have a chat.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is part of the reason I'm going, is like, we know there's just this huge tsunami of information that's going to come at us over the next few years. Wolfram is busy working on that, and I'm kind of going to get a feeling for, what all that implies, both technically and then also in terms of content.
So there were two challenges on his side: access to the data, and then the quantity of data. Yeah, because the data in the data structure wasn't even easily processable. Right. And that was then leading to some limitations, and we will see whether kind of other mechanisms will kind of give more opportunities. You're sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for the work. Definitely will read the paper. Be interesting. Maybe listen to your conversation and everything you presented and the doubts, we have in different processes. Maybe we need to come back to what is Catalyst and why we are here. And maybe there's actually two catalysts. I mean, there's, early stage of ideation of ideas, right? And there is seed money, which is more money, being provided, like in the last fund. So maybe, and both of them are important in my view. And but maybe there's different system for different stages as well. I'm just putting it out there because it seems kind of instead of it's kind of, there is a conflict out there, and maybe there should not be a conflict. Somehow there should be kind of consensus on the way forward in general. But yeah, maybe as the growth, when you started, it was smaller amounts, it was all about ideation, and as it grows and budgets are growing, yeah, I'm just throwing it out there if it makes sense. Maybe there's different system for different stages.
Yeah, we see that in the real world here also, kind of like funding in the real world is also in a number, goes through a number of stages. So perhaps that's a discussion which has to be brought to the table and say, is it the time kind of like to have different, have different stages of funding?
Yeah, maybe incubation. Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe incubation can be a smaller amount.
And the maximum amount is 50,000, which kind of like probably compared to the big spends which we have this time, not really substantial. And I'm just putting a figure out of thin air, so it doesn't really matter where this figure lies. But to give effectively the right opportunities to the different needs in itself, and not trying to kind of fulfill all the needs with the same mechanism. And I'm actually inviting everyone. I mean, we don't just have to write a white paper on dReps. It could also be a white paper on different alternative ways, kind of to do what we're doing effectively with a funding mechanism within Catalyst. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to mean that this kind of, okay, I wrote it will be implemented, but it will create and help the community to start having a senseful discussion on the topic, and that will for sure help. Felix,
what is the budget for the proposal?
it wasn't actually that much. I would have to. I think it was definitely under. I don't know, 7,000 or something, or 5,000. I don't know. You would have to ask Henrik. It wasn't massive.
And for how many contributors? 8 actually, right? 8 people worked there, let's say actively, the lead, and then you had contributors as well.
Yeah, so we had 8 people plus effectively from the community who kind of also got a little bit reward in that one. So it wasn't a massive budget. It was relatively small.
And how much time did it take?
Yeah, this was now, I think we started in July. So July, August, September, October, 4 months, 3.5.
Yeah. Pretty much nothing as budget. Okay.
Yeah. But that's not the point. The point in itself is it starts hopefully now a discussion. Now you have something which you can put in front of people and say, let's have a discussion around this topic. Yeah. And
exactly.
And it has not the intent was to demonstrate different things. First of all, the community is able to write white papers. People in the community are able to write white papers, number one. Number two, they can do that to a certain level of quality. I mean, Henrik is interested in certain segments to drive that further and drive it into, for example, an academic area, which has a positive impact also, because we are, as a community, kind of on the edge of decentralized governance. As said, there are not that many other examples, and when you look into literature, there is not that much on that topic either. Yeah, so there is this element, but it starts the community, at least parts of the community, starting to think about stuff, and we will kind of use the paper to start discussions around a number of things, and hopefully a lot of other people kind of feel tempted to also kind of look at certain topics which they are interested in and more or less write a piece on that one. Yeah, because that will help the community actually to educate itself also. Yeah.
Check victorious. And then, yeah, the recording is pretty much on hour. So I'd say,
Okay.
let's stop this. I will throw
Thank you.
nobody out. So chat stays open, call stays open as well. But